It began with a roar. Not just the roar of a crowd, but of a continent rediscovering its heartbeat. June 11th, 2010. Soccer City Stadium, Johannesburg. The first World Cup ever held on African soil. More than 94,000 people pressed together in a cauldron of sound and color. Flags waving, faces painted, the air shimmering with the pulse of vuvuzelas. The sound was deafening, relentless, like a swarm of bees that refused to sleep. Some would call it noise. South Africans called it music, the sound of arrival. For decades, Africa had been the soul of football, but never its stage. Its players dazzled in Europe, its fans filled the world's terraces. Yet the continent itself had never hosted the game's greatest spectacle. That changed on this day, when South Africa, once divided by race and scarred by injustice, now stood united under a single banner. Kenako, it's time. The opening match, South Africa versus Mexico. The eyes of the world watched as Bafana Bafana, the home side, walked out to face a nation rich in World Cup history. Cameras lingered on their faces, nervous smiles, clenched jaws, tears glistening under the golden light. Coach Carlos Alberto Parreira, calm but knowing the stakes, whispered final words to his players. The whistle blew. The vuvuzelas screamed louder, and with that, Africa's World Cup was born. Mexico pressed hard in the opening half. Their midfield carved triangles of precision. The crowd tensed each time South Africa's defense stumbled. Goalkeeper Itumeleng Khune shouted instructions, Steven Pienaar urged his teammates forward, and still, the breakthrough didn't come. Then came the 55th minute. The moment that would define the decade. Sifiwe Tshabalala, sprinting down the left flank, met a perfect through ball from Kagiso Dikgakoi. He didn't hesitate. One touch to set, another to launch, a thunderbolt of a strike, arcing toward the top corner. The ball screamed past the keeper, kissing the net, and then silence for a split second, before the explosion. A roar like thunder rolling across the high veld. Tshabalala's arms stretched wide. The bench emptied. The players formed a circle, dancing in rhythm, their bodies moving in harmony with the drums, the horns, the joy. The Diski dance, part celebration, part declaration, we are here. That goal wasn't just South Africa's first. It was the first ever scored in a World Cup on African soil. The moment became instant folklore, replayed across screens, studied in classrooms, remembered in song. The crowd's chant of Bafana, Bafana, echoed beyond the stadium, carried by millions of voices across the continent. But beneath that explosion of joy lay a story years in the making, a gamble few believed could succeed. The decision to award South Africa the World Cup had been met with skepticism. Could a nation still healing from apartheid's scars handle the logistics, the pressure, the spotlight? Stadiums had to be built from the ground up. Roads, airports, rail lines, transformed in record time. Entire communities were displaced. Billions were spent. Yet for ordinary South Africans, the World Cup wasn't about politics or economics. It was about dignity, about being seen. Hosting the tournament meant rewriting how the world saw Africa, no longer as a footnote or charity case, but as a force of culture, color, and capability. We will show them who we are, said one Johannesburg taxi driver in the weeks before kickoff. Not the Africa they imagine, the Africa we live. And show them they did. From Cape Town's gleaming stadium to the townships surrounding Soweto, the nation transformed into a single stage. Every street corner pulsed with rhythm, every window flew a flag. The whole world felt the heartbeat of South Africa, its music, its dance, its defiant joy. Waka Waka. This time for Africa, Shakira's anthem featuring the South, African band Freshly Ground, became the unofficial hymn of the tournament. Its lyrics, "You're a good soldier, choosing your battles," carried a deeper resonance in a country that had fought for its very soul. The song's infectious rhythm fused with the blare of vuvuzelas, creating a soundscape that was chaotic, unique, unforgettable. And for a fleeting moment, it felt like football had transcended itself. Yes, the opening game ended 1-1. Mexico equalized through Rafael Marquez late in the second half. But it didn't matter. That night, the scoreline was irrelevant. What lingered was the image of Chabalala's shot, the eruption that followed, and the realization that Africa had arrived on the world's stage, not as a guest, but as a host. Yet, as fireworks lit up the Johannesburg sky and fans danced in the streets, deeper questions echoed beneath the celebration. Could South Africa sustain the unity born from sport? Would the tournament's promise endure beyond the final whistle? For now, none of that mattered. The dream had begun, and the world had heard Africa's anthem, loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. But to understand how this dream took shape, how a nation once exiled, from football's family came to host its crown jewel, we must go back to the origins of that dream. Back to the days when football was not freedom's stage, but its forbidden fruit. Long before Sifiwe Tshabalala's left foot made history, before the world heard the vuvuzelas sing South Africa. His story with football began in a very different time, one when the game was a quiet act of defiance. The origins stretch back over a century. British soldiers brought the sport to the Cape Colony in the late 1800s. But while football quickly became the pastime of the elite, it also found a home in the dusty streets of townships and mining camps, among men who worked long days underground, returning at dusk to chase a tattered ball across the sand. In those moments, the game was freedom, brief, fragile, but real. As apartheid took hold in 1948, sport became another line of segregation. White-only leagues flourished with government funding, while black, colored, and Indian communities built their own federations, parallel worlds of passion and exclusion. The South African Football Association, representing white teams, refused to integrate. In response, non-racial groups formed their own body, the South African Soccer Federation. By the 1960s, international pressure mounted. FIFA expelled South Africa in 1961, condemning apartheid's racial policies. For decades, the country's footballers became ghosts, unseen on the global stage, their talent confined to backyards and local stadiums. And yet, the game endured. In the streets of Soweto, boys balanced balls made of plastic bags and string. In the townships of Durban, matches drew crowds that rivaled professional games elsewhere. Football became a silent language, a place where race, class, and politics collided, and sometimes for 90 minutes disappeared. Out of this underground passion emerged a generation who would one day reclaim the sport for a new South Africa. When apartheid finally fell in 1994, Nelson Mandela recognized the power of sport not just as entertainment, but as transformation. Rugby had united the nation through the Springboks' triumph in 1995, a story immortalized in Invictus. Now, football was next. Mandela understood its reach. Sport, he once said, has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. And so began a new mission, to bring the World Cup to Africa for the first time. The campaign wasn't easy. South Africa's first bid for the 2006 World Cup was agonizingly close. When the vote went to Germany by a single ballot, Mandela and the entire nation watched in silence. But rather than concede defeat, the country redoubled its effort. Behind the scenes, figures like Danny Jordan, the future head of the 2010 organizing committee, and then President Thabo Mbeki began crafting a new vision, one that tied football to the nation's rebirth. Their argument was simple but profound. Africa had given so much to the global game, its flair, its rhythm, its heroes. Yet the continent had never been trusted to host football's greatest show. South Africa would be the gateway, the proof that Africa could not only compete but lead. In May 2004, in Zurich, the world watched as FIFA's Sepp Blatter opened the envelope. The 2010 FIFA World Cup will be organized in South Africa. For a moment, silence. Then, pandemonium. Danny Jordan wept openly. Nelson Mandela raised his hands in joy. "I feel like a young man of 15, he said, his voice trembling. Across the nation, car horns blared, flags waved, and strangers embraced in the streets. The dream had come true. But dreams demand sacrifice. The following years saw a frenzy of construction. 10 new stadiums rose across the country, including the gleaming Soccer City. Its design inspired by an African calabash, a communal pot symbolizing unity. Billions of rand were poured into infrastructure. Entire communities near construction zones were displaced. Critics questioned the cost in a nation still struggling with poverty. Yet for most South Africans, the idea of the world finally coming to their soil was worth it. Taxi drivers memorized phrases in Spanish and German. Street vendors practiced English greetings for visiting fans. School children learned songs welcoming the world. Every corner of the nation prepared to perform. By 2010, South Africa was ready. The airports gleamed, the roads shone. The banners unfurled, "Welcome to the first African World Cup." But beneath the pride was a flicker of fear. What if it all went wrong? What if the power failed? The transport collapsed. The fans didn't come. For the world's media, that question became the story. Western headlines warned of crime, chaos, and third world problems. Some pundits doubted whether the games would even finish on schedule. But South Africa pushed forward, its people united by one phrase, "We will show them." And when the first fans arrived, thousands from Mexico, Spain, Brazil, and beyond, they found a nation not in disarray, but in celebration. A country alive with rhythm, pride, and purpose. To outsiders, it might have looked like simple joy. But to South Africans, it was something deeper. It was the sound of centuries of exclusion finally giving way to inclusion. The world was about to see the rise of a new kind of World Cup, one powered not just by players and sponsors, but by the heartbeat of a nation determined to prove that Africa's time had finally come. The months leading into June 2010 were electric. Every streetlight carried a flag. Every car mirror fluttered with ribbons of yellow, green, and red. South Africa was transforming, not just physically, but spiritually. The promise of the World Cup had become a living, breathing presence. From Cape Town to Polokwane, anticipation pulsed like a national heartbeat. Workers who had built the stadiums now proudly wore the same colors as the fans they once only watched. Radio stations buzzed with countdowns. Street vendors painted their stalls in team colors. And children in townships mimicked the celebrations of stars they'd only seen on TV. Football wasn't just coming home, it was finally coming here. But beneath the rhythm and color lay pressure unlike anything South Africa had faced before. Hosting the first World Cup on African soil wasn't simply a tournament. It was a test of faith, competence, and pride. Every potential setback carried the weight of a continent's reputation. For coach Carlos Alberto Parreira, a World Cup winner with Brazil in 1994, the task was monumental. He wasn't just preparing a team, he was preparing a symbol. Bafana's FIFA ranking had plummeted to 83rd in the world. The expectations were low, the scrutiny immense. In training camps across the country, Parreira drilled discipline, fitness, and belief into a squad that had been dismissed as underdogs. He knew his players wouldn't outmuscle or outskill the giants of Europe or South America, but they could outfight them, outwork them, and outplay them with passion. Stephen Pienaar, the team's quiet leader and Premier League star, became the bridge between local pride and international professionalism. Midfielder Sifiwe Tshabalala brought pace and flair, while goalkeeper Itumeleng embodied resilience, a player who'd come from township leagues to the world's biggest stage. Each session carried the same mantra: play for the flag, play for the people. Meanwhile, the world was arriving. Fans poured into South Africa from every corner of the globe. Airports thrummed with color. Sombreros, red and yellow scarves, face paint, drums. Even skeptics who once questioned whether South Africa could host the tournament were now swept up in its energy. The stadiums, once skeletal construction sites, now stood as architectural marvels. Cape Town's Greenpoint Stadium glimmered like a bowl of light beneath Table Mountain. Moses, Mabida in Durban, with its soaring arch, looked like a gateway to the heavens. And in Johannesburg, Soccer City's calabash design seemed to glow from within, a monument to unity and ambition. The opening ceremony rehearsals reflected this same spirit. Choreographers, dancers and musicians from every province came together, crafting a performance that would tell South Africa's story, from ancient kingdoms to modern freedom. Among them was the spirit of Ubuntu, the idea that I am because we are. And that was the truth of the 2010 World Cup. It wasn't just South Africa's tournament. It was Africa's. Ghana, Ivory Coast, Cameroon, Nigeria, Algeria, all carried the hopes of the continent. The dream wasn't just that one team would lift the trophy. It was that Africa itself would shine. Still, within South Africa's camp, doubts crept in. In friendlies leading up to the tournament, results were mixed. Critics argued that hosting wasn't enough, that Bafana would embarrass themselves in front of the world. One newspaper headline read, "A party without a host." But then something shifted. In May, just weeks before kickoff, South Africa faced Denmark in their final warm-to-up match. They won 1-0. It wasn't the scoreline that mattered. It was the conviction. The team pressed, tackled, passed with rhythm. The crowd sang with renewed faith. The nation began to believe again. Everywhere, signs of transformation were visible. In Soweto, murals of Mandela in football jerseys appeared overnight. School children learned to sing the national anthem in 4 languages. Even the police, often viewed with suspicion, were cheered as they patrolled with smiles and flags. The streets were alive, day and night. Markets overflowed with replica jerseys. The air smelled of roasted meat and sunscreen. The country had never felt this unified since the 1995 Rugby World Cup. And then came the eve of the opening match. In Johannesburg, night descended on a city humming with expectation. The skyline glowed with banners that read, "Welcome home, world." Inside hotels, journalists from Europe and the Americas typed feverishly. Some still skeptical, others now convinced they were witnessing something extraordinary. The players gathered for their final team talk. Pereira's voice was calm but fierce. "Tomorrow," he told them, "you are not just footballers. You are South Africa." Outside, fans paraded through the streets, blowing vuvuzelas like war horns. Fireworks lit the sky over Soweto. Children danced barefoot in circles, their laughter echoing between buildings. Across the nation, televisions flickered to life. Every township, every farm, every suburb, united by one hope, to show the world that Africa could not just host, but inspire. That night, even those who didn't follow football stayed awake. Because this wasn't about sport anymore. It was about dignity, about redemption, about pride. For a country that had once been silenced, the next day promised something unthinkable. The chance to speak in the language the world would understand best. Football. The world would soon see what South Africa had built, what it had endured, and what it was ready to share. And when the sun rose over Soccer City the next morning, it was more than dawn. It was an awakening. The moment the whistle blew to open the 2010 FIFA World Cup, South Africa exhaled. The years of doubt, deadlines, and disbelief gave way to pure reality. The world was watching, and the spectacle was flawless. The tournament's first week was a kaleidoscope of color and chaos. Vuvuzelas filled stadiums like a constant storm, their drone echoing across every broadcast. To outsiders, it was an alien sound. To Africans, it was a heartbeat. Journalists complained, locals grinned. "That," one fan said, "is the sound of Africa breathing." The world adjusted, and then began to dance to the rhythm. In the group stages, Bafana faced Mexico, Uruguay, and France, a brutal draw for the hosts. After Shabalala's wonder strike in the opening game ended in a 1-1 draw, South Africa needed something miraculous to survive. But football, as ever, is a cruel storyteller. Against Uruguay, Diego Forlan's long-range brilliance silenced Soccer City. A 3-0 defeat hit hard. For the first time, fear crept in. Could the dream end before it truly began? Yet even as results turned grim, the atmosphere never broke. Fans still poured into the streets, horns still blared, flags still flew. This wasn't a failure, it was a festival. South Africa had redefined what it meant to host. Then came the final group match against France. The French team, mired in chaos and rebellion, had imploded off the pitch. Their strike over internal disputes made headlines worldwide. For South Africa, it was one last chance, not to qualify, but to leave a mark. And they did. Bongani Khumalo's header and Katlego Mfela's sharp finish gave Bafana Bafana a famous 2-1 victory. The stadium erupted as though they'd won the trophy itself. The nation cried, sang, danced. For the first time in history, a host nation had been eliminated in the group stage, and yet somehow it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like transcendence, because by then the war had shifted. This wasn't just South Africa's story anymore, it was Africa's. Across the continent, hope moved north, to Ghana. The Black Stars carried the torch, embodying everything the tournament represented: pride, resilience, and the dream of continental triumph. Under the leadership of Asamoah Gyan, Ghana advanced through the group stage and then stunned the United States in the round of 16. They became only the third African nation in history to reach the quarterfinals, and the only African team left standing in a World Cup held on their home continent. Every South African, every Nigerian, every Kenyan and Ivorian now cheered as one. Ghana wasn't just Ghana, it was Africa. Their quarter-final clash against Uruguay became the tournament's emotional crucible. 90 minutes ended 1-1. Extra time, chaos. Then, in the final seconds, a header from Ghana's Dominic Adeyeye soared toward goal. Uruguay's Luis Suarez, standing on the line, used his hands to block it. A deliberate, desperate act. Red card. Penalty. If Asamoah Gyan scored, Ghana would become the first African nation ever to reach a World Cup semi-final. The entire continent held its breath. He ran up. Struck. Crossbar. The whistle blew. Penalty shootout. Uruguay won. And with that, Africa's dream, so close to rewriting history, ended in heartbreak. In Johannesburg, silence fell. Even South African fans who had spent weeks dancing and singing stood still. It wasn't just Ghana's loss, it was the continent's. Suarez's handball became both infamous and iconic, a moment that crystallized the cruel beauty of football. But if Ghana's exit broke hearts, it also proved something undeniable. Africa belonged on this stage. Elsewhere, the giants of Europe clashed in a World Cup of tactical revolutions. Spain, led by Andres Iniesta, Xavi Hernandez, and David Villa, embodied a new form of football, tiki-taka, all short passes, movement, and control. They didn't overpower teams, they suffocated them. Germany unleashed a youthful machine, powered by Mesut Ozil, Thomas Müller, and Miroslav Klose. The Netherlands rediscovered their ruthless efficiency under Bert van Marwijk. Brazil and Argentina dazzled, then stumbled, undone by defensive lapses and destiny's twists. But through it all, South Africa's magic lingered. The stadiums never emptied. Fans from rival nations danced together in the stands. Matches felt less like battles and more like celebrations of difference. Even FIFA officials, notorious for their stoicism, admitted they'd never seen an atmosphere like this. Security was flawless. Transportation worked. Cities thrived. Critics fell silent. The so-called Third World Cup had become one of the most organized, joyous, and profitable in FIFA's modern history. In one Johannesburg cafe, a banner summed it up best. They said we couldn't do it. We did it. They said we wouldn't fill the seats. We did. They said we wouldn't be ready. We were. As the knockout rounds reached fever pitch, it became clear that this tournament had transcended football. It wasn't about who would lift the trophy anymore. It was about what the tournament itself represented, the triumph of faith over fear, of unity over division, of music over silence. Still, as the semi-finals approached, tension returned. The War of Nations was reaching its peak. Spain, calm and methodical, edged past Germany 1-0 with a Carles Puyol header. The Netherlands, ruthless and bruising, defeated Uruguay in a tempest of goals and fouls. The final was set, Spain versus the Netherlands. And as the sun dipped over Soccer City on July 11, 2010, the world prepared for one last night of drama, a night that would define not just a champion, but a legacy. July 11th, Soccer City Stadium, Johannesburg. The calabash glowed in the night, a golden bowl of light beneath a velvet sky. Inside, nearly 90,000 spectators filled the stands. The world's cameras were trained on a single stage, and from the first note of the national anthems, it was clear this wasn't just the end of a tournament. It was a moment of destiny. Spain versus the Netherlands, two nations haunted by near misses, both searching for their first ever World Cup title. One, the architects of modern football, the other, its eternal bridesmaid. Between them, a century of dreams, disappointments, and redemption. But for the host nation, for South Africa, this night was something more. It was the validation of everything they'd worked for. The flawless stadiums, the vibrant cities, the unity that transcended race and region. This was proof, glowing before billions of eyes, that Africa had not only hosted the world, it had done so with grace, power, and soul. The match began with tension thick enough to touch. The Netherlands came hard. Tackles flew, bodies clashed. Within 10 minutes, Nigel de Jong's boot struck Xabi Alonso's chest, drawing gasps from the crowd. Spain, elegant and patient, tried to impose rhythm, their short passes forming a web of control. The game was brutal, beautiful, and maddening. Chances came and went. Arjen Robben sprinted through on goal in the second half, only to be denied by Iker Casillas' outstretched foot, a save that would echo through Spanish football history. Minutes later, David Villa found himself in front of goal, but his shot flew over the bar. Tension rose. The crowd oscillated between gasps and applause, between the orange of the Dutch and the red of the Spanish. And beneath it all, the hum of the vuvuzelas never stopped, a droning heartbeat reminding everyone where they were. Extra time. The final 20 minutes of the 2010 World Cup. Players limped. Coaches barked. The crowd began to chant not for Spain, not for the Netherlands, but for the beauty of the moment itself. This was history. Then, the 116th minute. Spain attacked. Cesc Fabregas slipped a pass into the box. Andres Iniesta, the quiet man from La Mancha, timed his run perfectly. He chested the ball, steadied himself, and struck. The shot flashed low and true past Martin Stecklenburg into the far corner. Goal. For a second, the world went silent, then erupted. Iniesta tore off his shirt, sprinting across the pitch, screaming into the night. Beneath his jersey, a message, Dani Jacques, siempre con nosotros, a tribute to his late friend and fellow footballer. It was a moment of raw humanity, joy and grief intertwined, the perfect poetry of sport. Spain's bench exploded. The Dutch fell to their knees. Around the stadium, even neutral fans rose to their feet, swept away by the sheer emotion. The final whistle followed soon after. Spain had done it. Their first World Cup. The culmination of years of artistry, patience, and vision. Casillas wept. Xavi collapsed in relief. Iniesta stood in the center circle, arms raised, as red confetti began to fall like volcanic ash. For South Africa, the moment was bittersweet but magnificent. The host nation, eliminated weeks earlier, now witnessed history unfold in their house. Nelson Mandela, frail but radiant, appeared for the closing ceremony. As he waved to the crowd, the entire stadium stood, a standing ovation for a man whose dream of unity had found its perfect echo in this tournament. When Spain lifted the trophy, it wasn't just a victory for La Roja. It was a victory for the game itself, for the idea that football could unite a world divided by language, politics, and pain. Above the noise, Waka Waka, this time for Africa, played one last time. The chorus rang out, "You're a good soldier, choosing your battles," and the crowd sang along, voices from every continent blending into one anthem. Fireworks erupted. The sky glowed over Soweto, reflecting off the golden panels of Soccer City. The air was thick with song, with memory, with meaning. In that moment, the 2010 World Cup ceased to be a sports event. It became something sacred, a shared story of humanity told through the language of football. As night deepened, fans from across the world streamed out of the stadium, dancing together under the same African stars. Spaniards, Dutch, South Africans, Ghanaians, strangers holding hands, trading flags, smiling through tears. One banner in the crowd captured it perfectly. "Thank you, South Africa, for showing us what the world can be." And as the lights dimmed and the last vuvuzela fell silent, one truth remained. This World Cup had changed the world's heartbeat. When the confetti settled over Soccer City and the chants faded into the Johannesburg night, something lingered, not the score, not even the trophy, but a feeling, a collective pulse that stretched beyond the stadium, beyond the final whistle, beyond that month of miracles. The 2010 FIFA World Cup had ended, but South Africa's story was only beginning. For many, the tournament's success was almost unthinkable. Before it began, the world's media had doubted everything, from the transport system to the safety of fans. They warned of chaos, of violence, of failure. But what they found instead was order, warmth, and pride. The legacy was immediate. Stadiums sold out. Transport systems ran on time. Security operations were praised as world-class. Billions watched the broadcasts and saw not fear but celebration. A continent united by music, culture, and joy. For one radiant month, Africa wasn't defined by its struggles, but by its strength. And for South Africans, that mattered more than anything. In the years that followed, FIFA and international observers would call the 2010 tournament one of the most successful in modern history. Not because it made the most money, but because it changed perception. For the first time, the world didn't look at Africa. It looked with Africa. Economically, the impact was complicated. Billions spent on infrastructure left both benefits and debts. Some stadiums became white elephants, underused after the tournament. Yet others, like Moses Mabhida in Durban and Cape Town Stadium, evolved into community, landmarks, symbols of pride, venues for concerts, festivals, and local sport. The true wealth, however, wasn't concrete or cash. It was confidence. A generation of South Africans grew up believing they could achieve anything. For children who watched Chabalala's goal, who sang Waka Waka in the streets, the idea of limitation felt smaller. The world had come to their doorstep and found brilliance. In the years after 2010, football in Africa surged forward. Ghana's near miss in the quarterfinals inspired new youth programs. Nigeria, Senegal, and Morocco expanded academies modeled on European systems. The continent's players became global stars, from Sadio Mane to Riyad Mahrez to Mohamed Salah, each carrying a piece of that 2010 dream with them. But the spirit of the World Cup reached beyond sport. It reignited belief in South Africa's identity. Ubuntu made visible. I am because we are. For a country once torn apart by division, those 4 weeks offered a glimpse of what true unity felt like. Fans of every race sang the same anthem, danced the same steps, and believed in the same goal. Even years later, South Africans spoke of the tournament not as something they hosted, but something they lived. In Soweto, murals of Chabalala's left foot strike still cover the walls. Taxi drivers still keep vuvuzelas on their dashboards. And when Waka Waka plays at weddings or street markets, it's never just nostalgia, it's memory reborn. People talk about legacy. One Johannesburg resident said years later, "For us, legacy isn't about stadiums. It's about how we felt, that for once the world was cheering for us." For the players who made that history, Chabalala, Piana, Kune. The memories endure like sunlight trapped in amber. They weren't champions by trophy, but by spirit. They proved that victory could be measured in joy, not medals. And for Andres Iniesta, the man who scored the winning goal, the legacy was just as personal. His message to Danny Jacques reminded the world that even amid triumph, humanity binds us all. His moment of glory became a moment of grace, fitting for a tournament that had been built on unity. Even Shakira's Waka Waka transcended its pop origins, becoming an unofficial hymn for an entire generation. Its chorus, this time for Africa, became more than a lyric. It became a truth fulfilled. Years later, as FIFA returned to award new host nations and new tournaments, South Africa's success stood as a benchmark. It had done what no one thought possible. It had taken the world's game, wrapped it in rhythm, and given it back brighter. The legacy was both simple and profound. South Africa didn't just host a World Cup. It redefined what a World Cup could mean. Because 2010 was not about perfection. It was about pride. It was about music echoing over the veld, about families who had never owned a TV watching their country shine on the global stage, about the collective heartbeat of millions saying, "We did it." As the years rolled on, other tournaments came and went. But none quite captured that same spirit, that mixture of chaos and joy, fear and hope, that electric fusion of continents and cultures. South Africa had given the world more than football. It had given it a memory of unity. And perhaps that was the true anthem. Not Waka Waka, not even Shabalala's Thunderbolt, but the sound of a nation finally seen, finally heard, finally believed. The sound of the vuvuzelas rising into the night sky, unending, unstoppable, the sound of a continent awake, this time for Africa, and for all time thereafter.